Thanks everyone for joining us. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Emma Brown and I'm the founder of Whimble. We are a care tech platform based here in Ottawa. And our goal and what we're building is an Uber style platform for personal care assistance, where people in need of urgent or short term personal care can connect with vetted, experienced attendants on demand. So we're basically trying to be everybody's backup system for care. And we also partner with event organizers and venues to ensure they offer on-site attendance services as part of their accessibility accommodations for guests, volunteers, and employees who might need extra support. And I'm excited for this conversation today because I don't know how many people actually know this, but Tim, our lovely guest for today's episode, was actually one of the original people who gave Whimble the idea for this event side of our business, which is like a really critical component of our success to date and what we're trying to build in the future. And it has solved a lot of kind of chicken or the egg problems for us on the marketplace side. So Tim very kindly participated in an early customer discovery interview. I couldn't remember if it was 2021 or 2022.
I don't
But
even remember.
but
It was at some point.
yeah, some point in the
Yeah.
not so distant past, but also several years ago. And I vividly remember you discussing the challenge of coordinating attendant care when you were going to work conferences to give keynotes and different like work related events. And I think you said something like how nice it would be for the event organizers to provide attendance to the guests instead of the burden being on you or the individual. So I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, Tim, but that was kind of the conversation I remember.
Emma, you can always put words in my mouth. It is totally fine. Yeah.
I appreciate that. So yeah, I'm very grateful to Tim because Wimble probably wouldn't exist today without that initial kind of seed of an idea. And he's very kindly joined us for today's conversation. So for those of you who don't know Tim, he is an accomplished activist, speaker, writer, and entrepreneur who was lucky enough to be born with cerebral palsy. He holds 2 degrees, including a Master's of Law in Human Rights from the University of Nottingham in the UK, and has lived and worked on 3 continents. What's the third? Europe, North America?
Asia. I grew up in the Middle East.
No way.
Yeah.
Didn't know
So
that.
I got to look at disability through the lens of kind of Middle Eastern culture, which was really interesting when I
Oh,
was
that's
a teenager.
Oh, very cool. So yeah, you were definitely raised to push the envelope, and you're an out of the box thinker who believes that disability is a true asset in business. Here. After building a career in the area of diversity research and community action, Tim is delighted to now be bringing that experience to the corporate world as a team member at CIBC in order to help reshape the way we see disability for all Canadians. He is also allegedly a wildly talented sketch comedian and member of the Second City Conservatory in Toronto. And I think you guys just finished a run of shows recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did. Comedy is my second love, second to disability advocacy, but I like to combine them when I can.
Amazing. There's so many good overlaps, and we try to do that a little bit with Wimble as well, with our unofficial
Yeah,
tagline is shit happens. And
absolutely.
yeah. So yeah, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've obviously got a lot on your plate as a performer and a full-time job and everything else. So I really appreciate this. I thought we'd get started just for the listeners who aren't familiar with your case against Air Canada. I feel like that's kind of a good starting point on the conversation around advocacy. And yeah, I was hoping you could start us off by just giving us a quick overview of the case for anyone who's not
Y-
familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Em, and thanks everyone for being here on your lunch hour and for listening to me drone on for the next 40 something minutes. In 2016, I was asked to attend a pastoral care conference, of all things, to speak about disability and sexuality, which was a really interesting audience to speak about that topic too, in Cleveland, Ohio. So, like I do all the time when I travel anywhere, when you have a disability, as I'm sure many of you know, you have to book several weeks in advance because there's this delightful thing called the disability tax, which is the extra stuff that people with disabilities have to do in order to just live their lives. But anyway, that's a bit of a side point. So several weeks before I booked the flight, I gave them the dimensions of my wheelchair. It was all good, confirmed. We flew to Cleveland. We had a great time. We ate tacos. It was good. Fast forward about 9 months from then, so we're now into 2017. I was asked by Progressive Insurance. So if anyone knows Flo from the Progressive commercials, that company, they're a big US insurance company, and they were at the Pastoral Care Conference, one of their employees, and they asked me to come back to Cleveland and speak to their corporate headquarters about diversity in big business. So I didn't think this would be an issue at all because I had flown to Cleveland the year before. And that's the reason I told the kind of the beginning part of the story, which I don't usually tell around the pastoral care conference, because I had assumed, like anyone would assume, I think, if you've flown there the previous year, you can fly there again. So I called them to make the booking, as I always do, several weeks in advance, and I was told that they had switched that route to a smaller plane. Well, actually, the plane was bigger. The cargo hold door was smaller. So it's the height of a door that prevented my wheelchair from going on this new plane. And they basically said, "Oh, sorry, we can't help you." And when I said, "Excuse me, what now?" They said, "Well, your wheelchair is just like a piece of luggage. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit." Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't think my legs are luggage. Just putting that out there. And so I brought it to the media and eventually created a bit of a media storm around this issue. And I was on pretty much every national news outlet for a number of weeks. I got hate mail emailed to me. It was full bore. Fast forward a few years, and I ended up bringing a case to the Canadian Transportation Agency Dispute Tribunal against Air Canada. I wasn't asking for any money at all. I was asking for policy change. And that policy change was if someone with a disability gives you notice and the route is served by a non accessible plane, you have to switch planes. That's all I was asking for. Did not think this would be a huge thing. Anyway, we brought the case to the CTA tribunal, and then COVID hit. So then the decision got delayed by a couple of years. Finally, we got a decision and I won. So Air Canada was ordered to make that policy change. Air Canada then decided to appeal that decision. And not only did they appeal that decision, they then decided to come after me for their legal fees. So fast forward another few months, and we end up going to the Federal Court of Appeals here in Toronto. And the case was heard by a three-judge panel with the Federal Court of Appeals. And I won again. So Air Canada was finally ordered to make that policy change, and they did not appeal to the Supreme Court. I'm guessing the reason they did not appeal is they did not want to lose for a third time, but also because the Federal Court of Appeals decision that was handed down was very strongly in my favor and very strongly in the favor of the rights of people with disabilities. And I hope that my case will be the pebble that starts an avalanche on this whole transportation advocacy field, because there's so many cases of broken mobility devices, lost mobility devices, not being able to transport mobility devices, and we have just as many rights as everyone else. So Emma, that was a very, very long-winded answer to your first question.
No, I think that's really helpful background. I'm curious, like, did you get any context into why, like, I can't imagine being a big corporation like Air Canada and then coming after a person who's advocating for people with disabilities and coming after you for their legal fees. Like, did you get any
So
sense of that?
yes, so my lawyers basically said that it was probably just Air Canada trying to scare me a little bit and trying to make me drop the case, right? And the other thing I should say, and I should have said this at the beginning, so I apologize, but huge credit to the Arch Disability Legal Center, which is the disability law center here in Toronto. They took my case pro bono for 8 years, and
Okay.
huge credit to that legal team. They did so much work. And when the Federal Court of Appeals decision came down, Air Canada was ordered to pay my legal fees and to pay Arch Disability Law Center for their time. And a number was decided that I can't mention because it's part of an NDA.
was gonna
But
ask.
yeah, unfortunately, I can't say.
That's fair.
So it was probably just Air Canada trying to scare
Yeah.
me.
Interesting corporate tactics.
I will also say that Air Canada's lawyer through this entire process was named Clay Hunter, which is like the worst villain lawyer name from like a John Grisham novel that you could possibly come up with. So I just want to put that out there. Shout out to Clay Hunter, the bad guy
Really,
in this.
really
Yeah,
committing to the part.
yeah, exactly.
My next question was going to be like logistically for someone who might be trying to like undertake their own kind of legal battle and advocacy piece around the logistics of like, did you hire your own lawyer? But it sounds like everything was sort of a partnership with Arch.
Yeah, because my case attracted so much media attention, it was a situation where Arch heard about me first, and they came to me and were like, we'd like to support you. And so that's how that happened. But I will say, for anyone that wants to take this on, I'm never going to say don't do it because we have rights as people with disabilities, and those rights need to be fought for. And a lot of people during my whole Air Canada experience said to me, Tim, people with disabilities just sometimes have to take alternate routes. That's just the way it is. I will say that Air Canada did offer one alternate route. It included a 16-hour layover in Orlando for a 1 hour flight to Cleveland. So I didn't think that was realistic or reasonable as a possible layover, but advocacy is tough and it is exhausting and it takes a lot of mental energy. It can often take a lot of physical energy as well. As people with disabilities, we are often pushing our bodies to uncomfortable limits. And so advocacy is challenging. But the only way I got through it was with the support of my community, the support of my workplace, the support of people around me, and honestly, the advocates who came before me. I remember speaking to former Lieutenant Governor David Onley, who has sadly passed away, and it was when Air Canada had appealed the decision, and I called David in frustration, and David said, Tim, they're scared. Like, and just hearing that from someone that had been there and done that, and David has since passed away, but I owe David hugely for kind of keeping me going through this whole thing. So leaning on the experiences of those who came before me, leaning on my family, leaning on my community was the only way that I got through this, and it is the only way that advocacy can be done.
Just the layer of the mental stress of this thread of legal fees over your head, like that alone would do someone in.
I felt like I was living in a bit of an episode of The Twilight Zone at some points because when this story first broke, I randomly had like reporters just showing up at my door unannounced, like just knocking and being like, "Can we interview you?" I had someone from City just show up at my apartment. So, like, even that, right? I think I did 8 media interviews in 2 days, and just having to kind of be on for that
Yeah.
whole time and deal with the backlash, right? Someone said that me wanting to take my wheelchair on a plane was what's next? Are they going to want to bring a giraffe on the plane? Well, that's not quite the same thing, but okay. But just dealing with the comments on the phone in shows and dealing with all of that, even that is takes up mental energy, right?
Yeah, that like underlying tension. Oh, I'm so sorry. I guess my question is like, do you feel like it was all worth it now? Do you have any regrets about the process?
I have no regrets at all. Obviously, I made policy change, and that is a big thing for all Canadians. And I'm not going to take all the credit because it was Arch and it was the community coming together and it was all the media that picked up my story and shared it and kind of got that collective outrage brewing. So there's a lot there. But obviously, if it makes a difference for one person, if someone wants to go to, I don't know, Bemidji, Minnesota, and there's a flight there, but it's on a non-accessible plane, and now they can go. I love that. So no, I have no regrets. Was it exhausting? Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was it difficult to deal with? Sometimes, absolutely.
Okay. And just to clarify, is this a policy change within Air Canada, or is this a policy change across the transportation industry?
So right now it is within Air Canada. I'm
Mhm.
hoping that other airlines pick it up and kind
Mhm.
of adopt it without someone else having to go through a case against Air
Mhm.
Transat or whoever
Mhm.
else.
Yeah,
But for right now, the policy change was strictly for Air Canada.
amazing. Is there applicability for this policy change beyond the airline industry? Where else do you see this kind of effects?
I mean, I think generally in transportation, people with disabilities are often forced into uncomfortable situations or forced into boxes that they don't want to be in. One of the cases that got mentioned a lot in my case, particularly in the Federal Court of Appeals hearing, was the Via Rail case a few years ago that went all the way to the Supreme Court, where Via Rail bought a bunch of inaccessible train cars, and then were told that they had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know, some large amount of money to make them accessible. And so I do hope this has ripple effects. You know, obviously, the thing that I hope most is that no one with a disability has to go through what I went through because it is so tiring. And so here's kind of one of my core messages that I wanted to mention today. And I'm going to go slightly to the left of your question here, Emma,
That's fine.
but just to say, I used to go out looking to pick a fight, right?
Guns blazing.
Because I think all people with disabilities often feel like you should go out and pick the fights and find those areas of injustice. And yes, I agree. If one is presented, absolutely. And that's what I did. But I often find that the best form of advocacy is trying to collaborate and work with people. And so, yes, the fight was fully on in my Air Canada case. But the more effective form of advocacy is to not go in guns blazing, but go in and say, let me help you get this right.
Mhm.
And more often than not, I mean, my Air Canada case was a huge exception to this, but more often than not, companies and organizations would much rather take that on rather than the reputational risk
Yeah.
of dealing with a case like mine.
Mhm. It's a great point. We've seen this in action here in Ottawa because Ottawa Tourism's been running, not sure of the exact term, but it's kind of an accessibility awareness and training cohort. And
Yeah,
basically, for any tourism related businesses in Ottawa who want to access accessibility funding, like to help with retrofits or to help hire attendants at their festival or hire sign language interpreters, whatever they're looking to fund, they now have to go through, I think it's a 6 to 12 month cohort where they have to commit time and energy. They have to engage with consultants with disabilities.
yeah,
They have to have their own tailored action plan. They have to look at their website accessibility. Like there's very concrete things they have to do to access that funding. And I think that's very much the like carrot method of if we all work together and we bring in resources to help you implement these things in your business because everybody's tired. Everybody's got lots of stuff that they're behind on. So adding more stuff to the plate can feel daunting. But if we bring in these resources to help you, there is funding at the end of that journey.
right.
And I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, and I just think like we often think of advocacy as my Air Canada case, right? As the kind of court case, and that is the path to advocacy. But I find the more effective tool is culture change. The more effective tool is to look at a system and say, let me help you improve it. And
Mhm,
that is still a completely valid form of advocacy. And I
mhm,
say that because a lot of people say, I couldn't go to the media. It is difficult, right? If you're not prepared for it, and I don't think I was even prepared for it at the time, like getting emails sent to you telling me what an entitled prick I am, that can be purple, and that
Hmm.
can be daunting. So I just want to put out there that advocacy to me is not necessarily about the fight. It is about collaborating for system change overall.
Hmm. Hmm. I love that. And I think you very nicely segued us into our next topic because we've been talking so far about your work advocating from the outside of a big organization, but you also have a, I'd say, fairly unique perspective where you also work within a large
Yep.
corporation and you're doing this work from the inside, collaborating with your colleagues across different departments on improving accessibility at one of Canada's largest financial institutions. So I was wondering, like, just comparing apples to oranges, like, what have you overall found harder? Was it pushing for change from the outside and not having to maintain relationships or worry about your job security and all, not having those same strings attached? Or, yeah, do you find the outside in perspective, or do you find it easier to be embedded in a team and be like advocating within that corporate culture?
It's a really interesting question, Emma, and I would say my answer changes based on how frustrating my day is in corporate Canada. But in all seriousness, I think for me, I've always said that I feel more like a change maker within CIBC than I ever did working a decade of nonprofits. And the reason is, yes, you have more to push against, but you also have more to push with. And I've been with CIBC for 8 years now. And in those 8 years, I've been able to identify what I call the levers of power and where we can push for change effectively within a large organization. I mean, we are a bank of 42,000 people around the world. We are a bank of millions of clients. And 27% of those clients, according to statistics, have a disability. So if we are ignoring 27% of the market, we're not going to get very far. So really driving culture change from inside an organization like I'm able to do in my day job now is, yes, it can be frustrating and it can feel like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, which I recognize is an entirely ableist analogy and I apologize. But it's also so much fun because for the first time in my career, in my advocacy career, I have the resources to make change. And that change can be slow and that change can be difficult, but you are making change just by trying to give something like a bank a better lens on disability, right? And that's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show them and show the organization the value and the return on investment that we will get by caring about our community.
Yeah. This is probably like me preaching to the choir a little bit, going back to your pastoral care background. I think the role that banks and financial institutions have to play in society, like access to finance, access to banking, like those are such fundamental things for people. You need to have access in 2025 to banking. So I think it's such like a critical component of what society needs to be accessible.
I think to build on what you're saying, Emma, what I found is a lot of people with disabilities are not given that financial education because someone else will deal with it or their
Mhm,
parents will deal with it. And so they're not given that kind of portal into even a space to talk about their finances or
mhm,
learn about their finances or understand what the registered disability savings plan is and how to apply for it, right? Like these are
mhm,
incredibly critical things that are often overlooked for people with disabilities. And that is fundamentally what I'm trying to change within
mhm,
CIBC.
mhm,
And that is a slow pace of change. It's not going to happen overnight. And that's just the reality.
yeah.
But just to say that is a huge kind of part of all of this.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you're saying earlier of this is good for business. If more people
Yep.
understand their RDSPs and understand how to budget and use their checking and savings account, like this is more customers.
Well, and I'll share that a few months ago, I had the opportunity through a connection here with one of my colleagues to speak to W. Ross McDonald in Brampton, which is a school for the blind
Mhm,
in Brampton. And I was online on Zoom like this and doing a presentation about financial education, and I literally could not leave because they had so many questions. Like,
Hmm.
I literally had to stay an additional half hour because they were so desperate to
Hmm.
talk to someone about their finances,
Hmm.
because they'd never had that opportunity. And that was really my light bulb moment to say, I think there's an opportunity here to really drive change within the industry. And I'll be honest, historically, banks have done a horrible job of accommodating people with disabilities, and that is just reality. There are people in every one of the banks now that are fundamentally trying to change that. So we'll see where we get.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions. Do you have a counterpart at the other major financial institutions that you can like share ideas with and bounce
So
ideas
we
off of?
we do, and there's actually a working group within the Canadian Bankers Association that is made up of the accessibility leads from the major financial institutions and insurance companies. And so I don't always attend those meetings because one of my colleagues is the primary lead there, but I have attended them in the past, and we do share a lot of information. And I'll share a bit of a funny side story in that one of my counterparts at the other banks is a former university friend of mine from Carleton University. So it is very weird for me to like see one of my frushies in a meeting and be like, "Oh, you're an adult now. I forgot that." But yes, we do connect regularly.
Trying to discuss formal financial stuff while
Right,
remembering
exactly.
drinking beers a lot. That's amazing. I guess going back to that topic of the cross collaboration, can you think of any really exciting success stories you've seen, whether it's within your own work at CIBC or within your counterparts' stories? Is there anything that you went like, hell yeah, like the ship is turning or whatever, the
I
tides
mean,
are turning?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that's happening kind of under the surface, right? And what you're seeing that's really positive in not just the financial industry, but a lot of industries, and particularly federally regulated industries, because of the Accessible Canada Act, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is the new federal accessibility legislation that came in 2019 that our country has sadly been without for 30 years, in contrast to the Americans. Everyone is shocked that they had the ADA far before we had the ACA. And it was the first George Bush who brought it in. So go figure. But anyway, just to say, like, we're seeing a huge amount of attention on accessibility right now. And that is really exciting, right? And you're seeing the heads of organizations say, we want to lean into this space and we see the value of this market, right? And that in itself is very exciting. But the other thing I'll mention is you're starting to see more people with disabilities, visible disabilities and non-visible disabilities, in leadership positions in the workplace. Now, that certainly needs to increase, and there's a lot more that can be done in that space. But like, I've been fortunate enough to move 3 times within CIBC into different positions, and each one I'm given new leadership opportunities to drive change and make a difference. And so we're starting to see a lot more of that in a lot of industries, and that is exciting.
And I know you have higher ambitions for your career.
I mean, ultimately, I do, but also just to build on that, I think as people with disabilities, we're often told that we can't dream and we're not going to climb the corporate ladder. Again, hugely ableist analogy, I know.
It is.
I once wrote a paper called Let's Turn the Corporate Ladder into a Ramp, which that title then got leveraged for an event at CIBC that I ran because I can steal stuff from myself. So, yeah, I think as people with disabilities, we're told that we can't have those higher ambitions and that we just have to worry about surviving, right? And we just have to worry about getting through life and dealing with all the extra, pardon my French, but dealing with all the extra shit
Mhm.
that people with disabilities have to deal with. And I don't believe that. I believe that you can be a comedian and you can write sitcoms and you can be a corporate leader. And I'll be honest, there are days when my body says, no, you have to slow down, you have to stop. I had one this week where my body was just like, nope, I'm going to tell you to stop. I'm going to make you in a lot of pain. I'm going to make you uncomfortable, and you have to stop. And that can be challenging when you work a fast paced corporate job. And I feel that pressure a lot. I'll be honest, like, I'll be blunt. I do not have this whole thing figured out. But ultimately, I want to be ambitious and I want to drive change.
And I think there's two roles to play, because I'm thinking back to our conversation for our Toronto Tech Week event, where one of our fellow panelists was an AI engineer within a tech company who has a disability. And her role, obviously she's there for her technical expertise, but then she's also advocating from within her
Right.
technical product development team of like, is this accessible, and making sure she's pushing from the product development side. And then there's people who have to push from the HR side, and there's people who have to push, like, all the
And,
sides need those advocates.
and I think, Emma, that's what leads to a lot of burnout, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that as people with disabilities, we are expected to both be the subject matter expert, but also share our lived experiences
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
vulnerably. And I'm used to that. That's something that I'm comfortable doing, but not everyone is. And so I recognize that there is a role to play in trying to balance how much you're giving of yourself to an organization. I have kind of perfected the art of being the thorn in other people's sides at CIBC. And for better or worse, often for worse, I have become the face of accessibility at the bank, and people know me for that. And that in itself can be challenging because sometimes people lean on me when I don't have time for them to lean on me. But ultimately, I want to focus on driving change within an organization. And I think what we're seeing is that if large companies get it right, then the small companies will start to follow,
Mm-hmm.
right? The big companies have to, because we are the ones with the resources, we have to be the one to drive the change and set the
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Set the standards. Yeah. For sure. I think one thing I would personally, and you did allude to this earlier a little bit, but I would love to know more about it. This is more a general question, not necessarily related to your professional experience, but what role do you think the media plays in this like cultural shift and changing public attitudes? And that can be the media, performing arts.
Well, so I've always said that the arts is the most important and effective tool for change that we have as a society. Now, I say that partly because I'm a giant musical theater nerd, partly because I grew up with a brother who's an actor, partly because all of these things, and I was raised in a household that really prioritized the arts. And so I really do see the arts as an important vehicle for change. And all you need to do is look at the characters with disabilities that have appeared in mainstream shows. You look at something like Breaking Bad, where the main character's son had cerebral palsy and it wasn't a huge thing on the show. You look at movies like The Theory of Everything, the Stephen Hawking story, which we can debate till the end of time whether they should have got a disabled actor to play Stephen Hawking. But ultimately, it did show disability in a really, romantic situation. And that is powerful in itself, even if they didn't get the storytelling exactly right. And in general, I think the media is a hugely important tool. I think there is a danger these days in how fast we can consume media. There is a danger in fake news, even in the disability space, right? And all you need to do is look at Donald Trump blaming the plane crashes that happened a few months ago on the fact that the FAA hired a bunch of disabled people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he literally blamed our
Mm-hmm.
community for
Mm-hmm.
those crashes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, that is fake news, but people read that and
Mm-hmm.
people hear that. And so I think the media, it's a bit of a double-edged sword for me. I think it is both a hugely positive tool in advocacy, but also a challenging one.
Yeah, that's a great point. The whole like anti DEI backlash and everything that some media outlets choose to really
Right.
carry that message is super frustrating. Okay, I do want to check if there's questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up in a few minutes. One question that came through was, can you tell us more or define the disability tax?
Absolutely. I love talking about the disability tax. So I don't want anyone to panic. You do not have to resubmit your taxes. It's fine. There is no DST that needs to be claimed against anything. The disability tax is the idea that as someone with a disability, you often have to take longer to do basic stuff, right? So the example I always use is me wanting to go into a bank. I work for a bank, so let's talk about bank. If my colleague wants to go into a bank, they get in their car and they drive 10 minutes to the bank. If I want to go to the bank, I have to book Wheel-Trans about a week before. I have to book an attendant to put my coat on if it's winter. I have to do all this extra stuff just to go to the bank. And all that extra stuff, yes, it's just a few other phone calls, but it adds up, right? And so the disability tax is this idea that even to just get to what society considers a base level, people with disabilities often have to pay an additional tax. And it's not a tax of money, it's a tax of time and a tax of energy that really can suck you dry, which I realize is an unfortunate way to say that. But yeah.
And it can be a tax of money because if you had to pay for a
Right.
private attendant for people who
Right.
have Whimble because their routine support system's not flexible enough, that's paying out of pocket for that extra support to accommodate your life. We had a really powerful moment. It was almost a year ago, actually, on a panel hosted by Ottawa Tourism. And so there was a bunch of tourism operators in the room, businesses. And our mutual friend, Andrew Gurza, gave the example of their trip to get to Ottawa to talk on this panel. And Andrew started from the point of, like you said, booking Wheel-Trans days in
Yeah.
advance, coordinating with the attendant to be there early so that they could get to the train early, getting to the train station, having to do the PMAth to manage the
Yep.
train ride, just everything. And you could feel and see and hear the jaws dropping because it was like
Right.
a 5-minute soliloquy until Andrew said, and then I got on the train. And that was
Right.
like, hadn't even left Toronto yet.
Right. And that is a perfect example of the disability tax, right?
Mhm.
And you see it in so many different situations. You know, even me wanting to break into the comedy world,
Mm.
most comedy spaces are up and downstairs or in basements or wherever. And so even me trying to find spaces for me and my troupe to perform is an example of that disability tax.
Yeah, it's like the emotional, the physical, and then often the financial costs. Okay, and last question. If I gave you a magic wand and you could change one thing about how we approach accessibility, what would it be?
Oh, interesting. And you made a magic wand reference, which as a giant Harry Potter nerd is very exciting.
Feel free to answer in song.
Well, I'm not sure if I'll go that far, but I'd be able to answer in parcel tongue. But just to say, so if I had a magic wand and could change kind of one thing, I think it would be that people with disabilities were paid to give their expertise and their lived experience. Because I am paid to do it and I get a good salary to do it. But I recognize people like Andrew Gurza who are scraping on ODSP to make a living out of their consulting because they can't find work. They're giving their expertise all the time. And huge credit to you, Emma, and Whimble and the Whimble team for wanting to pay people for their voices. That is not the norm. And so, if I could change one thing, let's give people with disabilities a universal basic income that they can actually live on so that they can give their expertise and do what they want to do and not feel like they are giving away for free all the time.
Amazing. Now, once more in parcel tongue.
Well, I could do it in Klingon. Do you want me to do it in Klingon?
We'll save that for the next episode.
Yeah, I'm a giant nerd, everybody. So,
it's fair. No, this was really interesting, Tim. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and I love everything you do and how like honest and transparent you are about it. At the end of the day, we have to be honest that like this shit sucks sometimes and is
yep.
hard and not fun. And yeah, it's good to be honest about that, and then also honest about the wins and the successes as well. So,
and I think if I could leave everyone with kind of one key message, it's that advocacy is exhausting. And so when you advocate, take care of yourself. Advocacy needs to be number 2 when you're looking at how to change a system. Number 1 is self-care. Too often we put self-care at like number 7 or 8. And it's advocacy, it's government change, it's all these other things. And somewhere at the bottom of the list, we remember, oh, we've got to take care of ourselves. No, we have to flip that list on its head. The most important thing in advocacy is taking care of yourself first.
I love it. I also needed to hear that today, so thank you, Tim. I appreciate
Well,
it.
and so did I.
Next time I'm in Toronto, we'll go for a beer and do some self-care.
We will go for more than one. How about that?
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much, Tim. I super appreciate your time and energy and everything you do. And to everyone watching or listening, I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, thanks again for your time, Tim. And I hope you get some rest.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love Whimble and everything you do. So if you ever need me again, you know where to find me.
Take care, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.